Welcome back, friendly neighbors and Spidey fanatics. Today we're going to be looking at 10 of Spider-Man's darkest moments. When you think of Spider-Man and Peter Parker, you think of the friendly neighborhood wall crawler or the geeky and awkward Mary Jane obsessed photographer. Well, today that's not the case. Let's talk about some dark moments. On Earth 2149, a very nasty plague breaks out and starts turning everyone, including superheroes, into zombies. During this time, Peter Parker started to realize that the plague is spreading too fast for anyone to control, so he went back home to get Mary Jane and Aunt May out of New York. However, by the time Peter reaches them, he starts convulsing and transforming into a zombie. Mary Jane and Aunt May try to calm Peter down and make him remember who he is, or rather, who he was, but nothing works and Peter devours both of his loved ones like Thanksgiving dinner. Oh, and he also ate J. Jonah Jameson, but I think eating his aunt and girlfriend is a lot more gruesome. Ugh. On Earth 8351, this Spider-Man gave up the friendly neighborhood persona and became a Black Ops trained assassin. During a rescue mission in Russia with Wolverine, Spider-Man was supposed to rescue a hostage from the KGB, but instead he ended up killing her. This turned everything around for Peter. Believing that the only way to put away criminals is to put them down permanently, he abandoned Mary Jane and fell in love with a new woman, Alex, who had a resemblance to Gwen Stacy. Kinda creepy if you ask me. The newly appointed assassin Spider-Man became a skilled hand-to-hand combat specialist and an incredible marksman. He had no mercy towards his enemies and even killed without a second thought. That is cold. This event is from Spider-Man's origin story. Some people might remember this as Peter Parker's biggest regret. When he got his powers, Peter Parker started off not as a hero, but on the wrestling circuit trying to make a bit of money. He was ripped off for his pay by the sleazy promoter, and during that same night, that owner was robbed of all his money. When the owner asked Peter for help in catching the robber, Peter had the "you didn't help me, so why should I help you" attitude. The robber got away. However, we found out later that the same robber that Peter didn't want to stop was the same one who killed his Uncle Ben. This was Peter's biggest regret in his life. It was also the driving force that made him become a crime fighter for New York. This was a very, very dark story arc for Spider-Man in an ultimate universe where everything in Spider-Man's life is 10 times worse than it already was. Crime is over the top, a corrupt mayor is in office, and the supervillains run New York City. Peter is an old man down on his luck, as always, and has constant nightmares and hallucinations about his past dead lovers. This feels like The Dark Knight Returns meets Spider-Man. A part of his story reveals that Peter not only dug up Mary Jane's corpse, but that he also made a sickening confession while holding her already decades-old body close to him, revealing that everything in his body is radioactive, meaning that every time him and Mary Jane made love, he was giving her a dose of radiation. That's just a bad one. In another reality where Peter turns into a killer through an act of rage, let me explain. When Kraven was on the hunt for Spider-Man, he became ruthless and more determined than ever to kill his prey. However, when tracking Spider-Man, Kraven took things too far and killed Kane, aka the Spider Clone, and Martha Franklin, aka Spider-Woman. In an act of rage and vengeance, Peter slaughters Kraven the Hunter in cold blood. Spider-Man is later hunted by the police, kicked out of the Avengers, and slowly began his life as Spider-Man the Anti-Hero. In the Clone Saga, Peter Parker and Ben Reilly were having a dispute over who was the real Spider-Man and who was the clone. In a DNA test, it was revealed that Peter was a clone. Now, obviously, this was rigged to get Peter enraged, and it worked. During the fight that Peter and Ben were having, it became so violent that a pregnant Mary Jane was forced to step in, otherwise Peter probably would have killed Ben. But in her attempt to calm Peter down, Peter backhands his pregnant wife and ends up throwing her across the room. With instant regret, Peter profusely apologizes to Mary Jane. While this is not as big as killing someone, this is still something that we ordinarily would never see from Peter. In the Sam Raimi trilogy, Spider-Man 3 showed a dark side of Peter when the alien black suit took over. Peter confronts Harry for all the hell he put him through. The two come to massive blows and destroy most of Harry's penthouse. They eventually reach the Goblin's lair, where Peter continues to taunt Harry about how his father, Norman Osborn, was ashamed of Harry and how he was a pathetic version of the Green Goblin. Harry throws a pumpkin bomb hoping to kill Peter, but instead Peter dodges it and web slings it back into Harry's face, permanently scarring the right side of his face and blinding him in the eye. It's one thing to do this to a villain, but to do it to a friend, yeah, that's just cruel. Now, we all know that this wasn't Peter Parker, but to us it still counts. When Doc Ock took over Spider-Man's body and became the superior Spider-Man, Doc Ock became a ruthless, no-mercy, killing machine superhero. He believed that criminals should be dealt with by him, acting as judge, jury, and executioner. He was kicked out of the Avengers, and his reputation in New York was tainted for a long time. Even when Peter Parker eventually took his body back, the damage was already done. In the god-awful Sins Past story, Peter finds out that before her death, Gwen Stacy had twins, Gabriel and Sarah, with Norman Osborn. Osborn played around with their genetics and sped up their aging process. When Spider-Man teams with Sarah to help Gabriel get away from the Mafia, Sarah starts to become very attracted to Peter. Peter is extremely uncomfortable with this, since Sarah looks almost identical to Gwen Stacy, and Sarah is Norman Osborn's daughter. Let's also take in the fact that Sarah is technically 10 years old, while Peter is married to Mary Jane. Basically, this ends with Sarah kissing Peter and Mary Jane walking in to catch them, and somehow MJ doesn't leave Peter for this. No, I am not kidding. Spider-Man sold his marriage to the literal devil. During the Civil War story arc, Aunt May takes a bullet because one of Spider-Man's enemies used his newly revealed identity as Peter Parker to hurt him where it hurts the most. See, Peter could have just accepted this and figured out another way to reverse this, maybe move on, but nope. He made a deal with Mephisto to have his identity go back to being a secret, which would mean that Aunt May would get to live, but in exchange, Peter would have to give up his marriage to Mary Jane. They basically gave up their whole future just so an old lady can live a few extra years. Wow. And on top of that, Mephisto shows Peter and MJ their future daughter they would have had if they didn't agree to this deal. And there you have it, 10 of Spider-Man's darkest moments. Let us know in the comments which dark moments we might have missed, which ones we could use in a follow-up video. Like this video, share with your friends, and be sure to subscribe right here to the Spider-Man fan channel for all the best Spider-Man themed videos every week. Thanks for watching. See you next time.